Hutchison? That noise, what's that racket?
That's the press, baby. The press. And there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing.
To be here tonight in person. Yes. So that's the press, baby, and there's nothing you can do about it. Boy, Bogey was certainly right, and he would be right again tonight. Tonight we celebrate that pledge, and we're going to keep it alive. So good evening and welcome. Thanks for being here. Welcome to the 2022 Richard H. Driehaus Foundation Awards for Investigative Reporting. And thank you all for being here and helping us honor investigative reporting in Illinois. So good evening, buenas noches. My name is Marta Carrera-Slave. I am the Vice Chair of the BGA Board of Directors, and really happy, thrilled, and proud to be here to honor our colleagues. As I think about, why does investigative journalism matter? Why now? Three things come to mind very quickly. I have experience firsthand on the dismantling of local news and the impact that has on our communities. I also wasn't born here. I was born in a country that doesn't permit freedom of the press. And, strangely, in the times we're living, I find that maybe I'll be reliving that over again. And at least in my lifetime, I can't think of a better time where doing the right thing matters. And investigative, responsible journalism does just that. So thank you for being here, and thank you for celebrating this evening with us. Now, on to the program. And happy to be in person. Hopefully you've had a few drinks. You've enjoyed the great food. Everybody feeling good? All right. I can't see you, but you look good. So let's talk about the terrific program that we have in store for you. We're going to have our own David Greising in conversation with Pulitzer Prize winning journalist 4 times, David Barstow. We're really looking forward to that. Then the main event, of course, the presentation of the 2022 Richard H. Driehaus Awards for Investigative Reporting, our Reader's Choice Awards, and the exciting addition of a new category this year, the Smaller Newsrooms category. So we're all looking forward to that. Let's take a minute to thank our sponsor for tonight's event, this wonderful venue and great food and drink that we're enjoying. Since 2010, the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation has been a strong supporter for investigative journalism. Each year, the foundation demonstrates that commitment. Even though Richard is no longer with us, his legacy definitely lives on in these awards this evening. Before we get to the presentation of the awards, I'd like to introduce David Greising. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the BGA, and he'll be providing an update on the BGA's activities. As a co-chair of the board and a proud member, we just met a few days ago in person, which was also thrilling, but it just highlighted for me how terrific it is to be part of this organization. Really, the value of investigative reporting that the BGA does, the staff, the supporters, the colleagues, the communities we partner with. More than ever, it's so needed, and I'm so proud to be with this organization and so proud to be with you here tonight. So without further ado, and then also David will have a conversation with David Barstow, 2 Davids in conversation, talk about that. So David Greising joined the BGA in 2018 after a career that included stints at the Chicago Tribune and the Sun-Times, as well as regional bureaus of national and global news organizations, while leading the BGA's successful efforts to uncover public corruption, waste, and fraud from the city to the suburbs and in Springfield. David has also become a leading voice on good government issues through the regular columns in the Chicago Tribune, Crane's Chicago Business, and as a guest on local radio and television programs. And now it's my pleasure to introduce a colleague and dear friend, David Greising.
Thank you very much, Marta, for that nice introduction. We're lucky to have Marta on our board. She's a skilled lawyer and a former TV journalist, and she co-chairs the board's investigations committee. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's great to be back in person. Let's have a hand for that. Tonight, we're going to honor some complex and powerful feats of investigative reporting. The Driehaus Awards have become a tradition in Chicago journalism, and it's great to see past winners and first-time nominees together tonight. As we recognize other newsrooms, I also want to share some of the BJ's output over the last year. We've covered equity and public safety issues with investigative reports that exposed wrongdoing and had impact. The BJ's in-depth investigation of the broken promises of Cabrini Green exposed a quarter century of abuse and exclusion of the housing project's former residents. With Block Club Chicago, we revealed insider dealing at Loretto Hospital, and The Circuit, a massive data-intensive project with Injustice Watch, has revealed inequities and injustices in the Cook County courts. The BJ investigative team also uncovered breakdowns in ethics and accountability in government, which is one of our sweet spots. We uncovered earmarks worth $4 billion from the Rebuild Illinois program, awarded to projects sponsored by former House Speaker Mike Madigan. We exposed conflicts of interest and failings in the Child Welfare Agency that left foster children and agency staffers in unsafe and abusive conditions. We uncovered shortcomings in Governor J.B. Pritzker's investment blind trust, and we revealed possible violations of the state's revolving door law by Dr. Ngozi Ezike as she prepared to leave the state health department. And, of course, the failures before the fires. Published in collaboration with the Chicago Tribune, this important project revealed that 61 people died in buildings where the city failed to cure fire safety problems. The report earned the Pulitzer Prize for local journalism, the first Pulitzer in the BJ's nearly 100-year history. Thank you very much. On behalf of all my colleagues, we're thrilled to have won the Pulitzer, and we appreciate your appreciation of that. I'm pleased to share with you now the video that accompanied the series.
We still have people reported trapped on the third floor that we can't get to.
What's on fire? A building?
Chicago Fire Department.
It's fire.
A fire?
Oh, the building is burning.
Sir, please tell them to get out.
Baby's still in our apartment.
Mark England died in a single-family home the city knew was illegally converted into a boarding house. There were too many bedrooms and not enough exits. Sarah Amon died in an abandoned building so dangerous that it was ordered torn down, but the city didn't follow through. 4 of Shemaiah Coleman's children died in a building where the city failed to force landlords to fix serious fire hazards.
I love my Mark with Dirty Red.
A recent investigation by the Better Government Association and the Chicago Tribune identified 61 people who died in fires after government officials were warned about fire safety issues. The city failed to hold landlords accountable to fix the dangerous problems in time.
We found that hundreds of 311 complaints about these unsafe buildings were never fully investigated. And even when inspectors did document fire safety hazards, we found the city's process for holding landlords accountable isn't working. Landlords were allowed to delay fixes, cases were closed without verifying repairs, hearing officers let landlords off the hook with warnings or small fines. Follow-up was often too little, too late. The fires were concentrated in poor, disinvested areas, and the majority of the people who died in these unsafe homes were Black. They were put in danger by a failed system that routinely puts the interests of property owners above the safety of tenants. Bottom line, their government failed to protect them.
The dangers of an indifferent and incapable government really come through in that video and in the stories that made up the project. I'd like to thank reporters Madison Hopkins and Cecilia Reyes and editors David Kidwell, John Chase, and Karen Tishu for their incredible work on this 18-month-long project. There are other BJ stories I could mention, but I also want to recognize the work of the BJ's policy team, which benefits all journalists by defending our access to public records and enforcing open meetings. In recent successes, our policy team filed suit and put a stop to conference calls between Chicago's mayor and alderpersons that violated the Open Meetings Act. We won an Illinois Supreme Court ruling in our case against Navy Pier that's been going on for nearly 8 years, subjecting the pier to the same open records requirements of any public body. We helped win a state Supreme Court ruling that barred destruction of police disciplinary files, and we blocked a city effort to prevent the release of police misconduct records. We've led advocacy for ethics reform in the Illinois legislature and in the Chicago City Council. Looking ahead, the BJA is stepping forward in bold new ways. A $10 million commitment from the McCormick Foundation is enabling us to expand our investigative resources and introduce a commitment to solutions journalism. We hope to work in partnership with news organizations from across the state, including some represented in this room. We will add investigative reporters focused on the State House and on overlooked cities across Illinois, and we plan a major investment in solutions journalism, reporting that applies the rigorous investigative techniques of investigative journalism to identify government reforms that actually work. As a nonprofit news organization, we rely on supporters to help fund our work, and many BJA supporters are in this room today. Thank you for your commitment to our work, and thank you for investing in the future of investigative journalism in Illinois. In just a few minutes, I'll return to the stage to interview one of the best investigative journalists of our time, David Barstow. But first, Marta will introduce the finalists in an important new category of the Driehaus Awards.
And I'm back. There's a green room back there. I've never been in a green room. Thank you, Dave. So the changes in the economics of journalism are challenging all news organizations. Many of you know that firsthand. Perhaps nowhere is this felt more directly than in the small newsrooms. That's why the BGA and the Driehaus Foundation decided this year to introduce a new award, the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation Awards Small Newsroom category. This includes newsrooms based in Illinois with 25 or fewer editorial employees. Those are the ones that are eligible. I'm pleased to tell you that the submissions for this year, the first year, were numerous and extremely impressive. Here now, let's take a look at the finalists.
Gun violence weighs on Chicago's conscience. On any given day, there can be as many as a dozen shootings. They happen outside Citgo gas stations on Washington Boulevard or blocks away from the schools near 51st Street. People are shot in cars and on the stoops of their brick-laced three-flats. But after gun violence, life is more common than death. Of the more than 30,000 people who have been shot in the city in the past decade, 5 in 6 survived. Most victims are Black and Latinx. More than half are barely on the cusp of adulthood. The trauma of surviving can last a lifetime and is never exclusive to a single person's mental and physical recovery. Each incident has a ripple effect that extends to dozens, from the first responders to witnesses, fathers, mothers, sisters, and brothers, not to mention the nearby businesses. Together, they form a loose community, left to cope with PTSD, chronic pain, and grief. But even with that shared struggle, they're often on their own. The Trace spent months analyzing police and homicide data and speaking with residents directly affected by gun violence. We found that a state program designed to help victims and their families, for the most part, was failing to do so. The Illinois Crime Victim Compensation Program, a decades-old effort designed to reimburse victims and families for injury-related expenses, can take years to process claims. Although violence is especially concentrated in Chicago's poorest neighborhoods, people there didn't apply for compensation at significantly higher rates. These inequalities worsened in 2020, as the pandemic's first wave took mostly Black victims, hollowing out the same neighborhoods hit hardest by gun violence and the opioid epidemic. Even the city's vaccine distribution effort left these same communities behind. Most survivors and family of victims won't see any form of justice. Data shows that the Chicago Police Department stops investigating about a quarter of non-fatal shootings after just 30 days, citing insufficient evidence. This worsened during the pandemic, with more than a third of cases closed within a month. Data also shows that while Black people are most likely to be shot in Chicago, they are the least likely to see an arrest made in their case. As Champaign-Urbana's homicide count grew higher and higher, ultimately reaching an all-time record of 26, up from 3 2 years earlier, city officials and law enforcement leaders kept repeating the same phrases over and over. Among them, "This isn't a Champaign-Urbana problem, it's an everywhere problem." Using the Freedom of Information Act, News Gazette editor Jeff DeLessio set out to fact-check that statement in the first installment of what's now a 23-part, 270-source, 700-plus FOIA request, multi-platform project that will continue throughout 2022, has its own one-hour weekly radio spinoff, and has become the talk of the towns. Here's a brief overview of what Jeff found in the first wave of open record requests sent to 430 police departments and sheriff's offices in 48 states. Of the 68 cities with populations within 5,000 of Champaign, 1, Trenton, New Jersey, had more homicides by firearm than this Big Ten college town, a regular on best places to live lists. Of 46 cities with populations within 10,000 of Champaign and Urbana combined, 1, Hartford, Connecticut, had more homicides. Of the 316 U.S. cities and villages with populations within 5,000 of Urbana, 5 had more homicides. The reaction by community members? 1 part stunned, 1 part disturbed, 1 part eager to get to work solving it. The data we uncovered, a full 10 months before the FBI publishes its homicide statistics for the year prior, has been repeated hundreds of times, from pulpits at local churches, activists at city council meetings, callers to our radio stations, even inmates of the local jail who've written in offering to lend their own unique insights to a problem few realized was this historically out of hand. But the results of our open records reporting, including more than 250 other requests showing how many guns were seized by law enforcement in Illinois' 102 counties and 100 most populous cities, and reports for the 196 guns reported stolen in our 7-county area, was just the lead-in to the more impactful component of the project, our 27-part and counting community conversation on gun violence. No words we can share here can come close to capturing the tens of thousands you'll hear from mothers who've lost sons to gun violence, coroners whose job it is to notify family members, and families who fled neighborhoods they called home for 40 years. We featured a diverse panel of more than 200 parents, pastors, public defenders, police, coaches, community leaders, high school students, retired judges, state's attorneys, U.S. senators, and many more, from all walks of life, on all topics related to gun violence, from the toll it takes on a community to what ought to be done to stop it. We'll end with a few words from one of the many residents we've heard from, lifelong community member, critical reader, and League of Women Voters President Barbara Wysocki. Without taking sides or pointing fingers, the Gazette articles have opened doors for meaningful conversation and action by drawing on statistics and rankings, first-hand accounts, and introductions to local leaders who have been confronting this reality of violence for some time. The Gazette's presentation on gun violence is a great example of how necessary it is to not only have a local newspaper, but one willing to take on a necessary role of public service. Every now and then, the news would come out that a major corporation had donated a chunk of change to a public university's agriculture program. There'd be press releases, photo ops, and the christening of a new center bearing the company's name. But just how much corporate money has poured into public agriculture schools in the Midwest? Investigate Midwest, and Harvest Public Media wanted to find out. The outlets set out on requesting a decade's worth of data from most land-grant universities in the Midwest, but their efforts were stymied at nearly every turn. Some obstacles were legal, and some were merely petty. Some donations went to nonprofits associated with universities, and donations to nonprofit organizations can be kept secret. Some states have also just outlawed the public disclosure of donor information to universities. Iowa State University agreed to provide the data the newsroom wanted, but it furnished it in a lengthy PDF. They had to pay to have it converted via optical character recognition software to an Excel spreadsheet they could analyze. In the end, they gathered data on 4 major universities with large agricultural programs. The data showed long-lasting relationships between these universities and powerful agribusinesses, such as ADM and Monsanto, prior to its purchase by Bayer. Other public records augmented the reporting. Emails between high-level administrators at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign showed what the result of bountiful giving could be, donors expecting to be heard. Taken together, the data and the emails illuminate a relationship between 2 institutions, one that is supposed to operate in the public interest and one that operates for private gain. The Big Ag U series explored the intersection of these 2 institutions, finding discomforting connections between the 2. This story got its start during a community-led meeting held in a church in the summer of 2017. At the meeting, attorneys and parents expressed concerns over the high expulsion rates at the Morton High School District. During the presentation, a parent mentioned gang contracts at the school. Irene Romulo made note of this remark and a few months later submitted several Freedom of Information Act requests. One of those requests returned a blank form titled Gang Contract, which was the seed for the investigation. It wasn't until 2020, however, that Irene was able to fully investigate this issue after co-founding Cicero Independiente, a bilingual newsroom in Cicero. Morton District 201 is over 90% Latino and has schools in 2 towns, both of which have a documented history of government corruption and zero-tolerance policies against gang involvement, even attempting to force alleged gang-involved youth to move out of the city in the 90s. This history is explained in the investigation as it provides context for how the school policies emerged. The gang contracts are 1-page documents that high schoolers have to sign for allegedly being gang-involved. Using records requests, Irene found that the reasons for issuing a contract were often unclear, or for things such as watching videos. She also found evidence that some of the information is shared with local police, confirming what parents and advocates called a path of criminalization of young students. The story was being reported amidst the pandemic closures, limiting opportunities for in-person outreach. Eventually, Irene was able to find youth who signed the contracts and could share more about their impact. During the course of the investigation, which focused on high schools at first, she also discovered and reported for the first time that the elementary school district also tracks alleged gang membership of children as young as 12 years old. Other records requests revealed that Cicero maintains a police gang database that currently has over 16,000 alleged gang members in a town of 84,000 people. It was important for Irene that the story amplify the solutions proposed by the organizers who have known about this issue for years, and of the students themselves. The investigation was published in Spanish as well as in English and distributed with an accompanying Know Your Rights resource at several Cicero locations. This was an example of how this small newsroom can be guided by the needs of the residents of a bilingual town and publish investigations that are impactful and useful to the people who live there. After publication, several high school students and community advocates attended local board meetings to demand that the use of gang contracts be stopped. They also started an email campaign for others to send their opinions about the gang contracts to the school board members. Recent requests to the district show that no gang contracts have been issued in the school year following publication.
That was terrific. What more proof do we need than that local journalism matters and responsible journalism matters, and it makes a difference. Thank you so much. As you can see, our judges clearly had their work cut out for them, so we'll be presenting a little bit later and build up the suspense until we announce the winners. But now it's time to meet our special guest. David Barstow returns to Chicago, where he received his Bachelor of Science from the Northwestern University. While a reporter at the New York Times from 1999 to 2019, David was awarded 4 Pulitzer Prizes, the only journalist so far to be honored so many times, 4 times. But I do have to sneak in that the BGA also won a Pulitzer Prize. In 2019, he joined the faculty of the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism as a professor of investigative journalism. So as David Squares approach the stage, quick question for you. You saw the clip at the beginning on all the movies that have to do with journalism. Do you guys have a favorite news movie, favorite journalism movie?
His Girl Friday.
His Girl Friday, which I understand we wanted to put in the clip, but it was a long clip and it was hard to incorporate it.
And it's not very original for the head of an investigative journalism organization to say Spotlight would have to be mine. So I'm sorry for my lack of originality.
Excellent. Grant, come on.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you very much for joining us. I wonder, as I've heard you introduced here and then earlier today, does it ever get old to be introduced as a 4-time Pulitzer winner?
Never. By the way, just huge congratulations to the BGA for winning the Pulitzer.
Thank you.
With the Chicago Tribune.
Yeah, thank you.
When I was at Medill, I sort of hoped that I could get hired by the BGA. And they said, "No, kid, you got to go get some experience."
Yeah.
So.
Well, we're hiring now.
I'm thrilled.
So, if this,
for those of you who haven't read it, it's just an amazing piece of journalism, and congratulations.
Thanks very much. And obviously, coming from you, it means a lot from everybody who says it. You have particular standing on the question, I would say. So I wanted to actually leverage your Faller Pulitzers by. Normally, the lightning round sort of comes at the end of an interview like this.
Okay.
I want to start with the lightning round.
Okay.
And the lightning round is going to be, I'll name your Pulitzer stories, and just give us a taste or two of where the idea came from, okay?
Okay.
So, Dangerous Business, which explored dangerous workplaces and the failure of companies and the government to protect the lives and safety of people working at these companies. Where'd the idea come from?
Came from a tip.
Okay. What was the tip?
So my partner in that body of work was a guy named Lowell Bergman, who they made a film about him too.
Yeah,
very good, called
no
The
doubt.
Insider. On 9/11, he was on an airplane, and one of the airplanes that got grounded, and he was grounded and went to the rental car line, and in line with him was an old source of his from the Justice Department. And they got talking, and where are you going, where are you going? And the prosecutor said, well, I'm going to Tyler, Texas. And I was like, what are you doing, what's in Tyler, Texas? And the source said, well, there's this case of this worker who got killed at this pipe foundry there, and we're looking at maybe doing a criminal prosecution. And Lowell knew enough that this was highly unusual for the Justice Department to be sending someone to investigate a workplace safety case. So he jotted a few notes, put the note in his pocket, forgot about it because we were all chasing after 9/11 for a while, but eventually came back to the note. And at that point, we were thinking about teaming up and doing something, and he brought this note out, and we went from there.
Wow, that's quite something. Message Machine, which is about generals, former Pentagon people who were taken in into in cooperation with the run-up to the war to Iraq, trying to validate the argument for the war in Iraq?
A tip.
A tip, okay.
I get a lot of tips.
Good lesson for our reporters in the room. Develop sources so you get tips, yeah.
Well, we get a ton of tips, right? I mean, I get lots of tips. And the thing is like, how do you figure out which tips merit like some additional poking around? And in this one, I had been, this is after, as the war on terror had gotten up and running, and I had probably had the same experience many of you had watching TV, which was I felt like when every time you turn on the TV, you'd see these retired generals on air, and they always seemed to be sort of singing from the same hymnal. And so when I got this tip that there was actually this kind of secret...
There was a hymnal.
It turns out there was a hymnal. And, but it was because it had bugged me, right? That I had noticed this and it had bugged me when I got this tip. I was like, ooh, okay. And so that's where that one started.
Oh, that's a good one. Walmart bribery, the very systematic bribery of Mexican local officials in order to fuel Walmart's expansion into its largest market outside the United States, what became its largest market outside the United States.
You all know the answer by now. It was a tip. But again, it was a tip that struck at something that I've been thinking about a lot and wanting to find some excuse to delve more deeply into, which was, one of the things that's happened in our lifetimes is the growth of huge corporations. They're just a magnitude of order larger and have far more, not just economic power, but political, cultural, social power. And I was really interested in trying to find a way to explore kind of the emergence of huge American multinational corporations and how they conducted themselves, particularly abroad. So I've been sort of looking for something like this, and then this tip came to me in a really bizarre way, and it was just a couple pieces of paper.
Tell us more about the bizarre way. Bizarre is interesting. As a reporter, the word bizarre I find interesting, yeah.
It was, I'm trying to think how far I can go. What I'll say is that it was about 10 pages of material from an internal Walmart file that suggested that they had taken very seriously an allegation that their Mexican subsidiary was in a kind of wholesale, systematic way, bribing its way across Mexico. And so Walmart was this company that did not exist in Mexico. 10 years later, it was the largest employer in Mexico, private employer in Mexico, and completely dominated the marketplace. So the understanding that story with a corporation that, as all major US corporations, has a very strong written ethical code that says
Not to mention the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which might have figured into, should have figured into that.
So when these few pages came to me, it connected with this sort of thing that I had been mulling for a while and had been looking for something that would take me into that sort of fissure. And this tip did for the next 2 years of my life.
Wow. Next one, probably familiar to many in this room, Trump finances, the Donald Trump, the saga of how Donald Trump took $1 million loan from his father that he repaid with interest and became a billionaire, self-made person.
Self-made.
You ran that to the ground.
Yes.
Where'd that story come from? It was hiding in plain sight, I might add.
That did not start from a tip.
Okay.
That actually just started from a kind of recognition that began really when I was doing some reporting on him before the election. I remember the first story I was assigned to write about Donald Trump was during the run-up to the election. And my editor said, we think you should take a really close look at Donald Trump's history of truthfulness or lack thereof as a businessman. And I remember, so I wrote a story about this, and And I remember we had a huge fight at the New York Times about whether or not I could even say the word lie. And we actually didn't say the word lie in that first story. But part of that reporting and some subsequent reporting that we did convinced myself and some of my colleagues at the New York Times that we actually didn't really know anything about Donald Trump's financial history, and that we should just throw everything out, every clip that had ever been written about the guy, just throw it away and start from scratch and just try to understand from day one till today his financial history. And so it really came from sort of this recognition that this guy, who was at the time was president of the United States when we began this endeavor, that we just didn't really know him very well in terms of his financial history. And in fact, I worked with two other reporters, Sue Craig and Russ Buettner, on that project, 18 months. And we worked in this windowless room in the New York Times because it was all top secret. And we had this whiteboard where we would scribble down ideas, things that we had observed in our reporting. And eventually we came upon what we thought should be the headline for the story. And it was "The Correction." And we did that because the more we learned about this guy, the more we realized that journalism had completely failed for decades to actually rigorously examine this man's financial history. And as a result, he was able to run as president as a self-made billionaire who only got $1 million from his father that he paid back with interest.
And in fact, what was the real story?
The real story is that his father gave him over $400 million throughout his whole life. By the time he was age 10, he was getting paid $200,000 a year from his father's business empire. And this continued basically throughout his whole growing up into his adult life. And in fact, every time he screwed up and made a terrible business deal, his father's giving only increased. So that was sort of part one, was that he was built by his father. And in fact, if he had just taken his father's money and invested it in the S&P, he'd be worth way more than he is today. And then the other piece of it was that he and his family were involved in really a series of incredibly suspect tax dodging schemes that saved them hundreds of millions of dollars. So we described that.
Yes, you did. And in fact, you said that there were 295 streams of revenue over 5 decades to transfer wealth of around $413 million. How do you keep track of 295 streams of revenue over 5 decades? Tell us a little bit about the process.
Spreadsheets.
Okay.
Spreadsheets.
Goodness.
Yeah. We got obsessed with trying to understand all of the different creative ways that Fred Trump would direct money to his son. So, for example, the coins that Fred Trump was a huge real estate guy in New York, and of course, he had laundromats in his buildings, and so the coins and the washers and dryers, all of that money got directed to his son through a device.
Well, there's a Chicago pal by the name of whose nickname I think is Quarters, because he took quarters out of the tollway
is that right?
System. Yeah. What about? There's an outfit called All County Building Supply and Maintenance, and you can explain kind of how that figured into the operation. But also, in doing so, can you tell us, like, when you're looking at 295 streams of revenue, how does one company and its oddities stand out among this plethora of information that you're digging through and trying to organize?
Yeah, this one, so All County Building Supply. All right, so first of all, we all know that Trump loves to put his name on his company. So this was like the first red flag, was that there was
they didn't call Trump.
There was no Trump name.
That's good.
And then it had this sort of All County Building Supply and Maintenance. It sort of sounds so bland. It sort of sounds almost aggressively bland. And we thought, that's weird. And then nothing had ever been written about all county building supply and maintenance. And it had no profile whatsoever. It was just sort of this shell.
So it was the dog that didn't bark for you.
So it was the dog that didn't bark. And we became, and you know, when you're going down the rabbit hole on these stories, things like this start like obsessing you. And I would like wake up in the middle of the night wondering, what the heck is all county building supply and maintenance?
So tell our audience, I think they're dying to hear.
So it turned out it was one of the most important siphons of money. Fred Trump had huge amounts of money that he knew when he died would of course go to his kids, but they would get gobbled up by the inheritance tax, the death tax, and he hated taxes more than anything. So he didn't want to wait for that, and so he created this company, they created this company, All County Building Supply and Maintenance. So every time like a refrigerator broke in one of Fred Trump's buildings, Fred Trump would ring up All County Building Supply and Maintenance and say, can you give me a new refrigerator?
Which he owned, right?
Actually, it turned out his kids owned.
Okay, his kids owned.
Now, the refrigerator, now Fred Trump was like famously tight with money. He would like walk around his building sites, and if he saw like nails, he would like pick them up and insist that his workers reuse those nails someplace. But in this case, Fred Trump, through All County Building Supply and Maintenance, a $500 refrigerator, he would pay his All County Building Supply $1,000 for that $500 refrigerator. So that $500 profit now is just flowing to his kids as just regular old income, and it's a much lower tax rate. Now, this is all like really clever, except it had a horrible impact on thousands of their residents, because their residents lived in rent-controlled buildings. And in New York, the only way that you can raise the rent in these rent-controlled buildings is you have to say, well, I did some capital improvement. I gave them a new refrigerator. I put in a new boiler. I repaired the roof. So what they were doing is they were using these padded invoices, not only to enrich his children, but also they were raising rents on thousands of lower middle class renters across New York City.
And if I'm not mistaken, that is one instance, or maybe, I don't know if it's the only instance in this reporting, which was incredible reporting, that you outright, in your New York Times voice, called this a fraud.
Actually, we did it 4 times.
Okay, 4 times.
Four different schemes.
Okay, right. So the New York Times reported as a matter of fact, that this was a fraud.
Yes.
How'd you get that by the lawyers?
Because we had the goods. We had the goods. I remember vividly because I wrote that lead, and I wrote that lead and we said just straight out. And I think one of the things that I believe very strongly about investigative reporting is that you really do owe it to your readers at some point to like stand on your own 2 feet and say, this is what our reporting adds up to. This is what we've found. And it's scary to do, right? When you're saying, I mean, for those, I'm sure no one here knows it, but Donald Trump has sued us over this story, sued me personally for this story for $100 million.
Wow.
And of course, in the run-up to publication, there were all kinds of threats and so forth. But I think it's really important for journalism and journalists, you know, when they have the goods, right, when you've earned it, to say clearly what it is that you've found. And that's why editors like you exist to say, okay, prove it, show it, convince me. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I noticed that same quality in the stuff you guys did on the toll of the fires. You said some pretty tough statements about the nature of city governance here in Chicago, and you said it. And that's something that distinguishes investigative journalism from the day-to-day reporting.
Right, and you mentioned that you were sued, and also Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I know the Trump administration, because he was president when you published, so it wasn't just about Donald Trump and his business, it was also a political matter for the administration. Did they think you got it right?
So what's interesting is he sued us for $100 million. He's not actually challenging a single fact that we wrote. How about that, huh? It's 14,000 words. It's the longest story that's ever been published on the front page of the New York Times. And so he's not actually challenging the veracity. He has never taken.
Did he sue you for meanness, or what's the cause of action?
It's kind of a version of meanness, yeah. He's suing us around the concept of tortious interference. And that's a really fancy way of saying that he is accusing us of effectively tricking or browbeating or extorting or doing something nefarious to get his niece, Mary Trump, to give us a whole bunch of financial documents from the family businesses. I can talk about it now because Mary Trump has written a book describing how she gave us all these documents. It was a very fun day when I drove away from her house in my Ford Explorer that was completely full of internal Trump financial documents.
Wow, that's quite something. And when we talk about impact, I mean, obviously there have been some litigation, you know, the New York State's attorney and there have been a couple of government investigations of his finances, but those have not so far
yielded
any.
Bupkis.
Yes, exactly. So, what do you make of that? Is that?
So yeah, it's funny. I mean, a lot of people. That story kind of broke the internet when it came out, and a lot of people thought, oh, this is the one that's going to bring him down. I actually never thought that was going to happen. In part because, first of all, it would require the IRS, first of all, to do something and open a criminal investigation, and the IRS that he controlled. So that seemed unlikely, and it required the Justice Department to do something significant, the Justice Department that he controlled. But then I thought, when I started seeing like what the Manhattan District Attorney's Office was doing and what the New York Attorney General was doing, actually their cases are built very much on the same exact pattern of tax shenanigans that we described in the story. The only difference is that the stuff that we were writing about mostly happened 10, 20 years ago.
Right.
So what they were focusing on was the question of whether or not the Trump family and Trump himself were effectively doing the same thing, in more recent times. And the evidence that's come out publicly in the court cases is that the answer to that question is yes. They're doing all of the same kind of shenanigans that they were doing. So I was really shocked when the Manhattan District Attorney announced that he wasn't going to bring criminal charges.
Right.
And obviously it was, the two main prosecutors quit in protest over this and felt like there absolutely was a criminal case. But I remember when the story came out, I was kind of hoping that Trump would tweet something mean about me. That's sort of a secret kind of goal of mine.
That's a goal. Mm-hmm.
But he did something even more clever. He said that the story was really long and boring, which I thought was like
14,000 words. I mean, come on, he's got a point, right?
Yeah,
boring, maybe not, but it was
he
long.
had a point. He had a point. Yeah. He had a point. But anyway.
Yeah. So, do you think that because ultimately a case was not brought, it seems that he has an opportunity, should he run for office again? This probably is a dead issue given all the water under the bridge since then. But if this comes up, what do you expect he will say? Will he defend it defend himself on his merits, or is it just a dead issue as far as?
So I think there's two things that are really important about that story. The first is it's really no longer credible, and no one really even parrots anymore the idea that he's a self-made anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that, like his financial history, we succeeded in sort of correcting what that history actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it certainly makes it, nothing will stop him from continuing to say he's
Right.
the greatest businessman of all time. But I think the other really important thing about a story like that is I think it's maybe the most important thing about investigative reporting, it's not so much whether a story like that causes someone like him to be prosecuted. It's literally just the act of insisting on the right, that we have the right as journalists to write a 14,000 word describing the crimes of the most powerful person in this country, if not the whole world. And that we get to do that, and then we get to come to work and do it again the next day, and the day after, and the day after. And asserting that right, like that you can deliver the toughest truths about the most powerful people, that is something that gets you killed in many, many parts of the world. It gets you put into exile. It gets you hounded out of countries and jailed. And I think that, for me, the thing that I think is most important about the impact of the work that we all do is not so much in the laws we change or the people who end up getting sent to jail, but it's insisting again and again and again that at least in this country, right, that we have the right to deliver hard truths about power and about how power is wielded in this country. And that is maybe a little less sexy and a little
Right.
less glamorous, but like that kind of, like I always think of myself basically as a gardener, and that my job is to pull weeds. And like I know the weeds are going to grow again. Like I know that there are going to be other big politicians who are going to cheat on their taxes and lie about their histories. I know there are other big companies that are going to pay bribes. But like pulling that weed and insisting on the right to tell the world about it on the front page of the New York Times, I think that's pretty righteous work.
Yeah, and it is. And I appreciate your view on that. That's really an important perspective. But 14,000 words or your typical 5,000 word story doesn't do much good if people don't read it. And writing, especially some of these more technical stories in a way that makes it accessible and readable, is also a huge challenge.
Yes.
The more technical, the more the challenge.
Yes.
I brought with the top of, I think, the lead story from your OSHA series.
Okay.
And if you don't mind, I'd like you to read it so people get a sense of
you're gonna make me blush.
narrative storytelling.
Okay.
Just 2 paragraphs.
Sure.
It shouldn't embarrass you too much.
Okay. It is said that only the desperate seek work at Tyler Pipe, a sprawling, rusting pipe foundry out on Route 69, just past the flea market. Behind a high metal fence lies a workplace that is part Dickens and part Darwin, a dim, dirty, hellishly hot place where men are regularly disfigured by amputations and burns, where turnover is so high that convicts are recruited from local prisons, where some workers urinate in their pants because their bosses refuse to let them step away from the manufacturing line for even a few minutes. Roland Hoskin was from the ranks of the desperate. His life was a tailspin of unemployment, debt, and divorce. A master electrician, 48 years old, he had retreated to a low-rent apartment on the outskirts of town and taken on an entry-level maintenance job on the graveyard shift at Tyler Pipe.
Wow. So raise your hand if you would have kept reading on that story. So let's talk a little bit about the narrative part of the work that we do, because a lead like that grabs a reader, obviously. And I wish I could have had him read the next 3 or 4 graphs because it gets better, believe it or not. But I want to ask you something that came to mind as you were reading that, and came to mind for us with the Pulitzer for the Fire series, is that 61 people died.
Yeah.
And we won the Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah.
You wrote about death and desecration of
Yeah.
human beings and in incredible conditions in this series. Tell us a little bit about your role as a storyteller and the feeling you have, how that informs how you come to view the fact that you receive such a high accolade for this kind of work.
I mean, I think first of all, I think first and foremost in my stories about the act of service. I think reporting when it's done badly is everything that its critics would say. It's extractive, manipulative, and it cares more about the story, right, than about the subject matter. The top of that story comes from years and years and years of trying to figure out a way to serve the people that I'm writing about by getting the audience to give a damn about them and to want to read about them and to make the story exude, especially at the top, to make it exude a kind of authority and a kind of every fact in here has been sort of earned in the old-fashioned way. And I think that journalism, when it's done right, when we really listen, right? When we really listen, when we really see, when we connect deeply with the communities that we're covering, and we listen to those communities, and then we give every ounce of blood, sweat, and tears to like actually tell that story well, right? Then I think that journalism can be a tremendous act of public service. So I'm always thinking first and foremost about like this idea of trying to serve the people that I'm writing about and the people that I'm trying to reach. I think it's like essential to getting to a top like that.
And thank you for that, Todd, and for that incredible piece of reporting throughout that series. You've talked about how you became a journalist because you played on your high school soccer, was it college soccer team or high school soccer team?
High school.
You went in, demanded coverage, that's how you became a journalist. You were clearly born to be an investigative journalist. What made you, and it looks like you disagree with that point, but when did you realize that investigative journalism is what you were called to do?
Oh dear, that's such a great question. For me, it it happened when I was in high school. I was a senior in high school, and I was adopted, and I was a rebellious teenager, and I was going through a rebellious time, and I was thinking, gosh, I really would love to know who my biological parents are. I bet they're like fantastic. I bet they're so much better than my mom and dad.
Oh God, no doubt, no doubt, yeah.
So I went into the Department of Vital Records in Boston and asked to see where they keep the birth records in Massachusetts. And I just sort of naively looked up my name and asked to see my birth certificate, hoping that somewhere on that birth certificate would be the name of my biological parents. And they brought this book out, this big leather-bound giant book, and the clerk kind of opened it up and looked, and then came to me and said, "I'm sorry, we can't show you your birth certificate because you're adopted. Aren't you adopted?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I asked her, I said, how did you know that I was adopted? And she said, well, it's stamped across the birth certificate. And I said, well, are the names of my biological parents there? And she said, no, they're on the back side. So then I thought, oh gosh, what if I could just ask for the next page? And then I'd be looking at. So I went back a day later and just asked to see the next page, the page number. And I guess this had been tried before, because they said, no, that's not the way it works. You have to ask for a name. So I went back, and then I thought, geez, I wonder if I could figure it out from looking at the indexes, the index system. And I spent days in this classic warehouse of old documents and records. I remember how much I loved the feeling of this place and the smell of this place and the weight of these books. And I thought I had sort of figured it out. I thought I had cracked the code. And so I went back and asked to see, I identified who I thought was the person whose birth certificate was on the next page. And lo and behold, they brought the book out to me. And so there I was looking at this page. And on the other side was the names of my birth mother. And I was like wondering, did I get the right one, right? And so when the clerk wasn't looking, I like peeked on the other side. And sure enough, it was mine. And I think that experience is what turned me into an investigative reporter, because that feeling, that incredible feeling of wanting to figure it out, and that feeling of recognizing like the power, right, of what that piece of information would mean for me. And that feeling of there's something that feels slightly transgressive, right, about investigative reporting. We're constantly poking into dark corners that we're not supposed to know, right? No, you can't see that. So of course you want to see it even more. And that experience really imprinted on me the sort of power of this. I think that really, more than anything else, is why I ended up becoming an investigative reporter.
Wow. We're about out of time. I just want to ask you, because one of the things we've wrestled with, because we are an investigative reporting shop at the BGA, and the reporters in this room are investigative reporters, as you know, we're jumping into solutions journalism. And what's your take? Is it solutions journalism investigative reporting? And what do we need to know, in your view, in order to do it well?
Yeah, so the easy answer, first of all, is that yes, of course, it's investigative journalism. In fact, the classic structure of investigative projects for many, many, many years was a 4-part series or 5-part series, and the last day was always solutions, right? That kind of went out of vogue because people like me hated writing solution stories. Mm-hmm. And we thought it was like Pollyannish, or it was like, I don't know, there was something, and a lot of times when you'd read these solution stories, it was like this sort of backhanded way of the reporter to sort of prove their hypothesis all over again, see somebody else is doing it in a different way. But that it's really from the work that I'm doing now at Berkeley and the interactions that I'm having with my students that has had me rethinking this in a much bigger way. And in part because there's an interesting thing that's happening in the generation of students who are coming up, which is they actually want to do serious, solutions-oriented journalism. And I think that there's actually, real potential. I mean, I think it's true. I think it's actually true that we have missed, actually, a lot of really important stories. And not like, puff pieces, but really important stories about people who are struggling to solve incredibly difficult problems. And there's like great journalism to be done about the struggle that those people are going through to come up with solutions to these problems. So I think the key to me, and what I'm trying to teach my students, is that the key is that we have to bring all of the traditional investigative rigor that we would bring to any story to looking at those folks who are trying to come up with, or think they've come up with, some answers to the problems that we're encountering. But the one thing that I know from just all of my conversations with my family and with my friends, they always say over and over again, how come you guys never write about like people who are like making progress, solving big problems. And I think they actually have a point. I think my students have a point. I think that we have, for whatever reason, because we were, I don't know, maybe we're too skeptical, too cynical, too tradition-bound.
Well, let me kind of ask you a follow-up in this sense. Typically, when I've been asked that question over the years, my response has been, what's journalism about? It's about storytelling. What's at the essence of a story? Conflict. And in a puff piece, there's no conflict, therefore it's not interesting. So if in looking at these OSHA failings and looking at Trump's finances and looking at these generals, there's a conflict that if you had to write a term paper about those stories, one could say, here's the central conflict of this story. If you're writing a solution story, can you find a conflict?
Oh my God, yes.
Tell me about that.
I'll tell you one of the stories I wrote in that package. One of the things that we were looking at was why, in this country, this was a kind of a stunning thing. It's still the case. It's you get a longer prison sentence for harassing a wild burro on federal lands than you do from willfully defying OSHA laws in ways that kill your workers. It's a 6-month misdemeanor to do that, to willfully defy safety laws. So I was really interested in looking at this question. Is there anyone who's actually prosecuting workers, employers who do this? And I found this guy in California who was doing that. And he was prosecuting a dairy farmer in the Central Valley who had sent one of his workers into a pit without any safety equipment whatsoever, and the guy had been overcome by the fumes of manure and drowned in manure. And this guy was prosecuting this dairy farmer in the Central Valley, and I was really curious to see, okay, what was the impact of this prosecution on the dairy industry in this part of the state? And this was like this prosecutor was like kind of the leading sort of voice of like, we actually need to get tougher if we're going to like create a deterrence against this kind of conduct. And what I found was a really murky, gray, interesting story that was full of tensions, right? There were people in this farming community who were outraged at this prosecution. This was a well-known farmer, a beloved member of the community, and it was a community that just kind of accepted death in the workplace as a sort of part of life, right? They just didn't value things in the same way. And yet I also discovered evidence that, lo and behold, holy cow, a bunch of safety measures were put in place in dairy farms all across the region after this prosecution. So I think that it was a very nuanced, complicated story that was full of conflict and tension and drama, quite frankly. And it's one of my favorite stories I've ever written.
That's great. That's really great to hear, and we'll hope to produce more stories like that. Thank you very much. This has been really interesting. I hope you all agree it's been an interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for all you've done for journalism. Really appreciate it.
Wow, that was amazing. Everybody was on the edge of their seats. Really incredible. Thank you for sharing those stories, David. And I think a lot of people are on the edge of their seats because there's a table back here with a bunch of awards. So let's get to it. We've seen the finalists for the smaller newsroom category. Now it's time to see the finalists for the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation Awards for Investigative Reporting. And once again, we received many outstanding, terrific submissions. Narrowing down the field was quite a task for the judges. Let's take a look at the finalists now.
At the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was Black and Latino Chicagoans who were hit the hardest, seeing a disproportionate number of cases and deaths as a result of COVID-19. But in December 2020, there were signs for hope. Vaccines had been developed and were being distributed. In Illinois and in Chicago, the first doses went to Loretto Hospital on the west side. It's a small safety net facility meant to serve the area's largely low-income and people of color population. In that spring, Black Club received a tip. Workers at Trump Tower downtown had been vaccinated even though they were not yet eligible to get the shots. We investigated and confirmed that ineligible people had been vaccinated at Trump Tower, and that one of the hospital's executives, CFO and COO, Dr. Anash Ahmed, was living there. From there, more tips came in. We were able to confirm that people were vaccinated at a downtown jewelry shop where Dr. Ahmed frequently bought items, as well as a steakhouse where Dr. Ahmed was a customer. Then we confirmed that a suburban church had also had a vaccination event. That church's pastor is friends with Loretto's former CEO, George Miller. We also learned about other improper vaccinations. While all this was happening, Loretto Hospital employees told me that they had had residents from the west side who had been coming and calling up desperate to get their shots and being turned away because vaccines were so scarce at the time. Again and again, Loretto Hospital representatives denied that these wrongful vaccinations had taken place, but we were able to verify that they had. We spoke to people who admitted to being vaccinated and who provided us items like vaccine cards or photos from the vaccination events. We also used documentation like hospital newsletters to verify where the hospital said it was hosting vaccination events. And we obtained photos and videos that showed Loretto executives' ties to Trump Tower, the suburban church where wrongful vaccination had occurred. These reports sparked meaningful changes. Our investigations led to Mayor Lori Lightfoot calling in for an independent review of the vaccinations done through Loretto. The city seized control of Loretto's vaccination doses to ensure that Westsiders would be properly vaccinated and protected against COVID-19. It also led to punishment for Dr. Anash Ahmed and for George Miller. They were originally suspended for some time, but as we revealed more and more improper investigations, Dr. Anash Ahmed eventually left the hospital. George Miller has now since left the hospital. It also led to a state representative resigning from Loretto's board in protest of how it had handled the scandal. It also sparked investigations from the FBI. Subpoenas show that officials have looked into the vaccinations tied to Trump Tower, as well as those at the suburban church. We were able to get these stories because our readers have a strong belief in Black Club's style of reporting. We're on the ground, we talk with people, we build trust with the communities we cover. Because of our reporting, we were able to ensure that people were able to get vaccinated correctly and that powerful officials were held to account.
Chicago's lakefront is one of the best things about the city, but there was a secret and tragic side to the iconic beaches on Lake Michigan and the public pools in neighborhoods across Chicago. WBEZ's Buried Secrets investigation revealed how generations of Chicago Park District lifeguards suffered harassment, abuse, and even assault in silence and shame. The station's series of stories led to high-level resignations, criminal charges, and public apologies from even the mayor of Chicago. It all began after we obtained confidential documents from an internal investigation at the Park District. The documents showed how the top Park District leaders delayed in taking action after graphic initial complaints from 2 young female lifeguards. In the coming months, we gave voice to the many former lifeguards who trusted us with their stories.
I can't even begin to imagine how many more women that this happened to in their jobs as lifeguards with the Park District.
We also revealed a similar hidden scandal just up the lakeshore in Evanston. At first, officials in both cities sought to defend their actions.
Lots of people are going to have opinions about what should and what shouldn't happen.
But WBEZ kept digging. Assisted by the FOIA team of lawyer Matt Topic, we sued the Chicago Park District and the mayor's office, and in an exclusive interview, the lead investigator in the internal probe at the Park District revealed to us how he was taken off the case.
I highly suspect that this is going to be a whitewash.
WBEZ's stories prompted the Cook County State's Attorney to open a criminal investigation
If you believe that you have been a victim of sexual abuse or assault while working at the Chicago Park District, I ask that you call our Park District tip line.
2 former lifeguard supervisors have now been charged criminally, and both Chicago and Evanston spent heavily on investigations by special outside counsel. In Chicago, a former federal prosecutor found Park District leaders had made no effort at meaningful reform until WBEZ broke the story. By the end of the year, the Chicago Park District's longtime CEO, board president, and inspector general had all resigned.
I'm deeply sorry for the culture of abuse and harassment that was allowed to fester in the beaches and pools.
New leaders at the Chicago Park District held public hearings on the matter and created a new office this summer solely to deal with complaints of sexual misconduct.
Drowning in Debt is a months-long investigation documenting how for years, Chicago leaders turned the city's water supply into a revenue stream. In the 90s, Mayor Richard M. Daley aggressively pursued Chicagoans with delinquent water bills. Over the next few years, Daley created our current punitive system that turns over delinquent water bills into the hands of private debt collectors, adding hundreds of additional fees in the process. Mayor Rahm Emanuel followed Daley's footsteps. In 2017, Emanuel implemented a water and sewer tax to fund the city's municipal employee pension fund. That meant that Chicago residents, like Carla Pageant, had to pay an additional $1,400 on average every 6 months because of that tax. Carla says she tried to keep up with the rising cost and the penalties, but it became unmanageable.
Why would you penalize people for water? I don't understand. This is not like this is a choice. I have to have water. This is so crazy. It just came from nowhere. Like I'm already struggling hard enough just to pay my mortgage. I could keep a roof over me and my baby's head.
WBEZ's investigation found the Chicago homeowners have racked up over $421 million in water debt. More than 60% of the debt is concentrated in the city's majority Black zip codes. Our investigation shed light on the city's debt collection system. Since debt collectors keep 25% of the debt collected, they're aggressive. Our reporting found that at least $60 million of the city's water revenue has gone to pay private debt collectors. And Chicagoans have had millions of dollars in earnings garnished from their paychecks. Others have faced judgments and statutory liens from water debt. WBEZ relied on millions of data records, archival documentation, and interviews from nearly 100 residents facing water debt to understand the policy and the scope of the problem. WBEZ's investigation prompted action by leaders at the state, county, and local level. A month after our story published, Governor J.B. Pritzker allocated $42 million for a new water assistance program for homeowners who can't afford their water and sewer bills. Drowning in Debt's community-centered approach created a new distribution model to ensure Chicagoans struggling with water debt had access to the information. WBEZ mailed over 18,000 bilingual postcards to residents enrolled in payment plans. The postcard had a QR code to our digital story, which was built for mobile. WBEZ also organized an educational workshop for Black Chicagoans and a bilingual workshop for Latino residents.
On November 7, 2021, the Chicago Sun-Times published a national exclusive, an 1,100-word story revealing the existence of a secret Defense Department investigation that found known gaps in service records for countless veterans, shortchanging them on valuable educational benefits under the post-9/11 GI Bill. The story shed light on why some veterans have had problems claiming benefits they are rightfully entitled to receive. It came about through a whistleblower, Nicholas Griffo, of the Buffalo, New York field office of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Griffo said he knew Zimmerman was the reporter he wanted to talk to because he'd seen her reporting in the Sun-Times exposing problems with veterans' GI Bill benefits. College students, the children of veterans, were being shut out of tuition and housing their parents had earned by agreeing to serve extra years in the military. In some cases, the VA started paying, only to later reverse its approval and bill the students $12,000 to $100,000. The first of Zimmerman's stories was about Paige Dotson, the daughter of a decorated Navy combat veteran from Michigan. Paige was forced to leave DePaul University in Chicago when the government suddenly cut off her GI Bill money and tried to collect $20,000. Her dad, Russ Dotson, who had agreed to serve 4 extra years to be able to transfer his GI Bill benefits to his children, was never told at retirement, after 22 years of service, that a mistake with his service record would leave his daughter out of luck and deep in debt. After the Sun-Times shared the story at no cost with the Dotsons' hometown paper, the Detroit Free Press, 3 U.S. senators and 8 congressional representatives appealed to the acting Navy Secretary to fix Russ's record and wipe out Paige's debt. By pushing the story beyond Chicago, Zimmerman unearthed many more examples of GI Bill problems that were affecting students nationwide. Most of these students were young children when their parents deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. Their parents had not created 529 college savings accounts because they had been promised their kids would be covered. Since these stories ran from 2019 through last November, the VA has announced it will no longer go after individual students. Legislation has been proposed to provide a more complete fix. Zimmerman continues to report on this issue.
I want to recognize briefly if you enjoyed an adult beverage today. It was compliments of the law firm of Lovey & Lovey, who is somewhere in the audience, and Matt Topic, who's our legal advisor for the BGA. Thank you, because you guys picked up the bar bill, so really appreciate it. Yeah, there's still time, absolutely. So how about a round of applause for all of the finalists and all who submitted their fine work for consideration. And now I'd like to bring to the stage the first editor-in-chief of the BGA and a fellow paisano, another Cuban, Reynaldo Ronnie Ramos, to lead the presentation of tonight's awards. Ronnie is the former executive editor of nonprofit news site, The Daily Memphian, and prior to that, he was the first person of color and executive editor of the Indianapolis Star. The Star's remarkable investigation of rampant sexual abuse at USA Gymnastics took place under Ronnie's watch. Ronnie is a Neiman Fellow and has served as a Pulitzer juror 4 times. He's also a proud graduate of the University of Miami. Ronnie, please come to the stage and let's get to the part of the program we are all waiting for.
I have the envelopes. I'm pleased to begin tonight's awards, but first, since everybody else has done it, I figured I can't pass up a chance. I'd like to take a moment to honor the journalists from the BJ and the Chicago Tribune who earned this year's Pulitzer Prize for local reporting one more time. It's kind of cool when I joined the BGA in late March and they announced it 2 months later, so I have no idea what I'm going to do for an encore, but we'll give it a shot. I also have witnessed firsthand our commitment to this story to hold city accountable for keeping people safe from the deadly fires. Chicago has one of the nation's most robust nonprofit news and ecosystems, and the energy and quality of investigative reporting extends statewide. In the face of reduced budgets and uncertainty, tenacious reporters are uncovering governmental inefficiencies, inequalities, and failures to serve constituents and communities with deep dive investigations and ambitious collaborations with other news organizations. I'm pleased to say that we have seen some extraordinary examples of that tenacity that drives the state's journalists in the submissions we received. They include 27 entries across print, radio, TV, and online, and many collaborations among news organizations. Reading that great material and rating the entries fell to our distinguished panel of judges. They are seasoned journalists and educators who know great investigative journalism, know our state, and were tasked with selecting the very best from a strong group of entries. Thank you to Jesus del Toro, Chris Burry, Brant Houston, and Charles Whitaker for the time and effort you put into this year's awards. Two years ago, we introduced the Reader's Choice Award. We could not be together in person, and we wanted to give our audience and supporters a chance to get involved in the spirit of these awards. Once again, we are presenting a Reader's Choice Award. We announced the finalists a few weeks ago and invited you, ardent fans and supporters of investigative journalism, to vote for the favorite. Earlier tonight, you saw the finalists. As a reminder, here are the nominees for this category. Congratulations to all our finalists. And the winner of the Reader's Choice Award is Kelly Bauer, Improper Vaccinations at Loretto Hospital, Block Club, Chicago. I can't see. Kelly, here. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Step over here, take a picture.
So I never expect to win anything, so this is very cool, and I have absolutely nothing prepared. As anyone at Block Club will tell you, I'm also a very nervous public speaker. But I just really want to thank the support of our editors who helped me dedicate a lot of time to this investigation, as well as our audience. They're the ones who provided us the tip. That way we could pursue the Loretto stories, as well as so many other stories that we do. And they're the ones who trusted us to protect their identities and to get to the truth of what happened at Loretto hospitals with improper vaccinations. So thank you.
We mentioned earlier our new category focused on investigative and enterprising journalism by smaller organizations, news organizations with head offices in Illinois and an editorial staff of 25 or fewer people were eligible for this new category. You've already seen their video submissions. Here's a reminder, the first ever slate of finalists for this new category. First, we'll give out the award for the recipient of the runner-up. The winner of the runner-up prize is Lakedra Chavez and Daniel Nass. Illinois has a problem to compensate victims of violent crimes. The Trace. I'm not sure that they're here, so I will accept on their behalf. And now it is my honor to present the first ever Richard H. Driehaus Award for Investigative Reporter by smaller news organizations. The recipient is Jonathan Hedinger, Sky Chad, Dana Cronin, Katie Peaks, and Seth Bodine, Big Ag U, Investigative Midwest, and Harvest Public Media.
I gave a high five to the guy who was trying to help me out. I'm excited about this. Just real quickly, thank you so much. We're really, really honored. This was months of hard work between our collaborator, Harvest Public Media, Illinois Public Media, and of course, Investigative Midwest, and some really great works by some really tenacious reporters. Thank you. We're very honored to receive this.
Nicely done. And now to present our main category of the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation Awards for Investigative Reporting. Please help me welcome the president of the, I messed that up, the executive director of the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation, Ann Lazar. Let's give her a warm applause.
Thank you so much, and I have more envelopes. It is truly my privilege to be here to represent the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation. As you know, Richard had a passion for investigative journalism. He particularly enjoyed this program and the chance to meet so many people who devote their careers to uncovering wrongdoing and failures in government. He respected the rigor of your work and saw the need for your impact on government and society. I'm pleased and honored to carry on Richard's legacy with the presentation of tonight's finalists and awards. The 2022 finalists are And now, the runner-up prize goes to Kelly Bauer, improper vaccinations at Loretto Hospital with Block Club Chicago.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I can't do this again. I'm too nervous. But thank you.
And finally, without further ado, the recipient of the 2022 Richard H. Driehaus Award for Investigative Reporting is Dan Mihalopoulos, Alex Keefe, Angela Rosa O'Toole for Buried Secrets, WBEZ, Chicago Public Media.
Of course, we want to thank, first of all, the people who came to us, gave us their trust, people with documents, we love you, people who shared bitter experiences. And I hope that for them, I fulfilled my promise to be as patient with them as we were impatient with the people who didn't respond as they should have to the things that were brought to their attention. I'd also like to thank the youngest person in the room, my daughter Juliana, my wife Connie, who are here, because these stories take a big toll on families as well, in the sense that we were on our way back from vacation when complainant A called me up on my cell phone, and we stopped at a friend's house in Wisconsin and took some notes, and they waited very patiently. There was another day we were summoned to South Shore Beach, which wasn't on our agenda that day. Connie was at work, Juliana was with me. Juliana came with me. The entire leadership of the Chicago Park District at the time was brought there to show support for the soon-to-be ex-CEO. He said a number of things that we found out were not true. And I asked Juliana at the end of it, I said, usually when a kid goes somewhere, people are like, hey, kid, what are you doing here? Like, what sports do you do? What activities do you do? And Juliana said to me, well, they knew that I came here with you, so it wasn't like that. Thanks very much.
Well, once again, congratulations to all of our winners and all of our finalists. Thanks so much. So we did it. We came to the end. A big thank you to all of you for being here, for supporting the BGA. A big thank you to all the reporters and investigative journalists in the room. Thanks again to our sponsors, the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation, the law firm of Lovey & Lovey, who picked up the bar bill. Thanks to the production company and everybody who made tonight happen, our BGA support staff, our BGA board members. Thank you also to those who served the wonderful food for us, who fixed the drinks, and who prepared this beautiful venue. A note to the winners, please join us on stage following the conclusion of the event so we can get more pictures taken. I know that's exactly what you want to be doing. Thanks again for being here tonight. It was a privilege and pleasure. Thank you, David Barstow, for incredible interview and incredible insights. Thanks for sharing that with us. And thanks to all of you for continuing the tradition of investigative reporting. By your work and your support of those who are doing the work, you are truly making Chicago and Illinois a better place to live. Thanks again. We'll see you next year.